Let's talk about data structures. So, to begin with, we have a distinction between observations and variables. To oversimplify a bit, observations are rows in a spreadsheet and variables are columns. Let's look at an example. This is a data set of New York City schools. You can see that the first column tells us the name of the schools, and the next column tells us the school type. So since this is a column, it's a variable, and we can see that several of the schools are elementary school. One is K through 8, which means it's combined elementary and middle school. We have a standalone middle school here. The next column is another variable. It's called overall score, and it tells us the overall score that that school got from the city on their system where they try to evaluate the performance of each school, how well each school is doing. The next column tells us the grade that school got based on their overall score. And the final column tells us the percentage of students in that school who are English language learners, abbreviated ELL. So let's give a little bit more complete definitions of observations and variables. Observations refer to one unit in a data set. So that could be a school like we just saw, or an event, or an object, or a person. And a variable is a characteristic of those observations, and it can take on different values. That's why we say variable, because it can vary depending on which observation we can look at. So this first observation, the overall score is 39, but it takes on other other values for the other observations. Now, it's important to note that you can encounter spreadsheets where the rows and the columns are what we say is transposed. In other words, it could be, for example, that we're looking at a data set that's describing different states, and each column is a different state, and the rows are telling us different characteristics of those states. In that case, the data set would be transposed, and this first slide would no longer be accurate because technically observations are defined by the substance, not by whether it's a column or row, but it is customary to display things in this format like we just saw. Another important term is unit of analysis, and this helps us answer the question, what is one observation? So on the prior slide, the unit of analysis is the school. It tells us how are we defining what one observation is. That's the unit of analysis. All right, a few more things we should know about data structures. There are different kinds of data sets that we can see. What we just saw was an example of a cross-sectional data set. That is that it's a data set that describes different units. A time series data set, the units are actually different points in time, right? So one row might be the year 2000, the next row is the year 2001, the next row is the year 2002, and so on and so forth. That would be a time series data set. We can also have combined types, like a panel data set, where we see maybe schools measured at different points in time, or a repeated cross-section, which is similar, except it's not the same schools. Maybe you have a different sample of schools that you study each year. That would be a repeated cross-section. Hopefully, these slides are helpful in giving you a little bit of background about how we store data, because that is going to be an important skill to know before we start doing analysis so that we can make sure we're accurately describing exactly what we're doing.